To be more balanced, and before I begin, I would just like to say that some people do benefit from globalization. Engineers who make new products benefit. Of course, supervisors, managers, other executives benefit. Shareholders, there's no doubt about it that shareholders benefit from increased profits. So to be fair, I'd like to mention the, well, rather small number of people that do benefit from globalization. To begin, the United States and its economic allies, as defined by countries subscribing to the North American Free Trade Agreement and global agreements on tariffs and trade, and other free trade agreements, have assured themselves the best possible corporate profits by moving manufacturing to countries with the lowest possible factory labor. Factory labor wages, without regard for how this affects their own labor communities or the horrific consequences of moving products so far in the face of global warming and myriad other pollution concerns. E.J. Wee, the author of Guangzhou Diary and editor of Guangzhou Uprising and head nanotechnologist at GIST, rightly points out that the best governments are those who create a burgeoning middle class. The opposite is also true, that the worst governments are the ones who favor larger corporate profits by shrinking their own middle class. Then the United States would be culprit number one, and countries like Vietnam, China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Mexico, Argentina, and too many more to list, who are being abused by this setup, are not to be blamed for allowing these pollution-heavy industries to move in and underpay their workers. Because each country's standards, the minuscule wages give a large population of people just enough to get by on. Not what a South Korean would call middle-class existence, but enough to survive. Benito Mussolini, himself a fascist, defined fascism as big business and government working together to the benefit of only big business and government. By this accurate account, the United States has been a purely fascist state since 1980, with plenty of on and off examples since its inception in 1776. The United States was founded on genocide, made rich by slavery, and continues to feed its insatiable greed by dominating human and natural resources worldwide, at gunpoint if necessary. Such openly American institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have ruined one economy after another in order to retain control, drive unemployment as high as 70%, see Argentina in the 1990s, and then move in manufacturing once free trade agreements are in place to improve profits by banning tariffs on products flowing back into the United States. In Argentina, J.P. Morgan and Fleet Bank went one step further and bought the central bank. Once accomplished, the IMF moved in and demanded austerity measures that would assure that J.P. Morgan and Fleet Bank were paid back their very stupid loans, not in pesos that were valueless, but in pesos that, after 3 years, were jiggered around to being 1-to-1 with the dollar. Two banks and a handful of manufacturing concerns benefited, while an entire population was reduced to economic rubble. This is not an isolated incident. Excellent research by my business English class at Cheonan National University discovered that of the 147 largest IMF loans since 1980, 144 countries' economies suffered greatly, like Ghana and other African countries in which the leaders stole great hunks of the loans, as the IMF knew they would. One country managed to battle back and save themselves, South Korea in 1998, and two countries saw economic gains by IMF loans since 1980, Belarus and Costa Rica, that's only two. The U.S. itself was not afraid to hand over its own sovereignty to the trade is king fascists that thought up the GATT treaties. Continued meetings of the G7, G8, and G20 have been met by ineffective, thus useless protests from the very beginning. Protesters are cordoned off into protest zones so far away from the proceedings the media won't be tempted to cover them, and the head honchos can walk from limousines to pampered meeting rooms guarded by expensive security forces without having to hear a single peep from the opposition. It is not hard to prove that globalization is in fact worldwide fascism on a scale Hitler could only have dreamed of. Even relatively poor countries like Russia can't help but join in the fun as they sell off their natural resources, mostly oil, so those at the top can have luxurious lifestyles while the rest of their country languishes in poverty. Was it a coincidence that the U.S. attacked Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Pakistan, even though 15 of the 19 bombers during 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia? Was it a coincidence that the Afghanistan The very man, Osama bin Laden, who helped us fend off Russia so it couldn't build an oil pipeline, attack Afghanistan as head of the Mujahideen, was the one who created 9/11, which gave us an excuse to attack Afghanistan, because that's where he's hiding out. No, this was true because once in control of the pipeline that circumvents gnarly Iran by going hundreds of kilometers too far to get to the Indian Ocean, the U.S. would also control a greater percentage of Russian oil profits. As it is, Russia now receives about 30% of the money generated from its own oil. Bad deal, eh? But Amoco knows how to drill, and Luke Oil does not. Capiche? The Iraq fiasco assured that Sunnis and Shia would be fighting ad infinitum. This is a replay of why the U.S. was willing to tie the Korean War, not win it, and lose the Vietnam War badly. Why? Because in effect, by losing both wars, Russia and China would forever remain unallied, or at least not allied until we could figure out which one would make the steadiest partner. Trading partner, that is. Winner, China, and loser by far the rest of humanity. One definition of socialism is from those according to ability and to those according to need. China is living proof that communism as a governmental choice has never existed. And its version of socialism does not in fact share things equally amongst everyone. Go to China, see what I mean. Yes, China is growing a middle class, but not at the expense of a large dose of inflation. Why? Because as the average factory worker in China makes 52 cents an hour, the Chinese government must control the price of food and rent with an iron fist. And too large a middle class would cause inflation, thus rioting amongst the factory workers. Lo and behold, over 40 cities in China have experienced such expressions of rage in the last 2 years alone. As the Chinese were lured off the fields and into the factories, they soon found out what seemed like big money came with the price of long hours, high rent, and many families ending up in debt who were never in debt as farmers. Poor, yes, but at least not worked to death. They are now working to fill the Communist Party coffers while watching high-rise luxury apartments go up and spiffy Audi and Buick automobiles passing the standard VWs on clogged highways. Highways not clogged by factory workers who jam like sardines into subways or walk or bike to work. But if U.S. manufacturing concerns are making so much money in Asia, the plastics industries in Vietnam pay an average of 40 cents an hour, then why are Americans losing their homes to foreclosure at a 6,000 per day clip? Ding. Well, it goes back to 1995, a year in which Bill Clinton, coming off a stunning reversal in the Democratic Party by getting his fellow conservative Democrats to usher in NAFTA, he added both Welfare Reform Act and Banking Reform Act. What a trifecta for the rich. Ross Perot, for all his rotten ideas, like surrounding drug-infested neighborhoods with SWAT teams and martial law, was right about one thing. There was a giant sucking sound of American jobs being moved to Mexico as soon as the sizable tariffs on goods coming into the U.S. were dropped. Winners, corporations. Losers, workers. Alta Cravey, in her excellent book, The Working Women of the Maquiladoras, points out that those highly polluting companies also moved to Mexico to flee what was left of the anti-pollution laws in the U.S. This gave the hard-working Mexicans exciting but heart-rending experiences like stillbirths due to anencephaly. That would be a baby born without a brain. Mexicans did not protest, as $1 per hour is an awfully high wage in Mexico. So the fate of American labor was set, and only got worse once tax breaks encouraged all companies to move to cheaper labor. Yes, the U.S. government was giving U.S. corporations a tax break if they would only move their jobs overseas. If only. Oh, they would, and they did. I'll get to more of that later, trust me. They moved, no, very few of these moved to Africa. It was been Central and South America and mostly Asia that has been dominated by American and European firms and their own subordinated governments under these treaties that help mostly the famous 1% that the US-occupied movements keep screaming about. But I digress. Clinton's welfare reform did this. It codified and made legal the concept that anyone who received government help can do so for 36 months per lifetime. That's it. Meaning, if you are a single mother and can't afford your work, can't find work and have 3 or 5 children, after 36 months, you're done. Couple this with NAFTA and later the effects of GATT 1 and 2 and you have a recipe for disaster. Ice this sewer cake with national, corporate, and individual debt, and the stench cannot be covered. Assure the next depression via the 1995 Banking Reform Act under Democrat Bill Clinton, and voila, you have the current mess in the U.S. You see, after the Depression of the 1930s, smart legislators who were not owned by corporations applied a 4-to-1 loan-to-deposit ratio, meaning banks could lend out $4 for every $1 they had in the bank. By the 1960s, it was relaxed to 12-to-1. Still, 12-to-1, at 12-to-1, very few subprime loans were handed out because there were still plenty of worthy customers who could afford to pay their mortgages back. Then came Clinton's law. I hope he's still happy about it, in which banks were allowed to lend out $30 for every one they had in the bank. Well, what happens then? To maximize profits by lending money only to those who could afford to pay it back, so they devised pernicious loans that were interest only for 3 or 4 years, or the famous reverse mortgages, which gave borrowers absurdly low payments at first while adding to the amount of the money they owed. A loan with the repayment of $700 a month the first 4 years could jump to $2,000 a month under such schemes, maybe even $3,000. The banks knew these folks wouldn't be able to pay back because they knew their income was less than $2,000 a month. What are they doing with $1 million home? I don't know. European banks, envious of their counterparts in the United States, requested the same absurd ratio. They did not get it until one finance minister thought up a scheme. European banks were allowed to lend more than the standard 10-to-1 in place at the time, as long as every loan over 10-to-1 was insured. This way, if shaky loans went bad, it would fall on a private insurance company to bail out the banks, not the governments of Europe. Which insurance company was dumb enough to fall for this assignment? AIG. So in November of 2008, when Goldman Sachs, Citibank, Bank of America, and AIG were receiving in total trillions of bailout dollars, the biggest initial bailout was to AIG. And where did the U.S. taxpayers' money go? To rich European bankers. CBS Television News came very close to asking the right question about this on their show 60 Minutes, but stopped short of what they knew to be true, thus letting the U.S. Congress off the hook for bailing out European banks. As if we had the money to do that, honestly. Let AIG just die. But they couldn't because so many Asians had their life insurance policies with AIG. They've been putting in $150 a month for their whole lives. If AIG dries up, we have a problem. So it's really, really sad. You almost can make a case for the bailouts, but what happens to the value of the U.S. dollar? We'll get to that too. In 1998, in Sweden, a similar banking meltdown occurred with one large difference. The bankers went to jail. Some are still there. And the banks paid the entirety of the bailout money back within 4 years. In the U.S., however, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America just moved $75 trillion worth of loans from their investment units to their commercial units. This is alarming, as in some, this represents 10 times the enormous U.S. national debt. It is horrifying because these loans are subprime mortgages now insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, meaning by law, U.S. taxpayers could be on the hook for 10 times more money than our entire national debt if those loans go bad. Once the FDIC bails out these loans, the banks are still free to sell the foreclosed properties for whatever they can get. And this is the killer, because banks have derivatives. They're making bets against their own loans. They make a ton of money when their loans go bad. Money one. M2, a different version of M2. They get bailed out. M3, they foreclose the loan and sell the house for about 20% of what it's worth. God dang. I'm serious. Really. We already paid for all these homes. Why should they kick people out? Honest. It's just my opinion, but why? It's truly sick. Hence, they don't mind getting 20 cents on the dollar since the entire loan has already been covered by the bailout. This has skewered the housing markets in Florida, Nevada, Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, California, everywhere. It's going to be everywhere. And the number of mortgages that are being foreclosed every day is in the 9,000 to 10,000 range. We'll get to that later too. Barack Obama was blamed for being the initiator of the bailouts. The Republicans now claim never should have happened. Oh, there's a political twist. Hank Paulson claimed that without bailouts, the entire banking industry would have collapsed, when in reality, Lehman Brothers is already being bailed out privately by J.P. Morgan. Well, the Bank of America was forced to bail out or swallow the debt of Countrywide and Merrill Lynch. Choosing Lehman Brothers would have been less expensive, but those bailouts, voted on by such notables as Nancy Pelosi, and every other dang Democrat, actually, and jammed through Congress with hardly anyone reading the details, happened under the Bush administration. Bush. In February 2012, the Republican candidate stormed Michigan, that's just a month or two ago, where auto manufacturers were in fact bailed out by Obama, saving hundreds of thousands of jobs, and said he never should have bailed out the car makers. Really? Seems to me they do not want to win in 2012 if they're going to Michigan and saying the job should not have been saved. And holy cannoli, the automakers paid the money back and are reaping huge profits from the bailouts. GM just set a quarterly record, all-time record. Oh, I shouldn't have been bailed out, which is far better than the banks have done. In 2012, then, is a repeat of 2008, when Republicans also threw the election by picking Sarah Palin as a VP running mate for John McCain. Talk about throwing an election. If the Republicans should, however, gain control of both houses of our legislature and the White House, then they would be stuck holding the ball when the Depression hits in earnest. And by golly, they were sitting in the White House, Herbert Hoover, a true market capitalist who refused to loosen the economic reins, thus exacerbating the crash of 1929. The last time around, would much rather kick back and sling arrows at Obama than stand up and do what needs to be done to correct the errors that started in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan, in 8 short years, tripled the American national debt. This is unreal, these Republican boys. That fiscal conservative figured he could borrow his way into a good economy, and everyone since, except of all people Bill Clinton, who has followed suit, to the detriment not just of the U.S. economy, but every country that holds U.S. dollars in reserve. 67% of the world's reserve currencies are held in U.S. dollars. That is the only reason the U.S. dollar has any value at all, because we've been printing them up. And now we go over here, oh no, not quite yet. The dollar, the world's reserve currency. Oh, here we are, 67%. Imagine how many China has with the most US dollars outside the US. Russia is number 2, thanks to oil, and then easy to guess countries like Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Germany follow suit. But due to a massive trade imbalance, the US itself ranks 22nd in held foreign currencies. We're not even like in the playoffs. South Korea weighs in at 6th, depending on how well its cars and electronic gizmos are selling in the US. And back in 2006, when South Korea announced it was going to switch its reserve currency from dollars to euros, the US stock market plummeted 600 points by noon. Even Bush, too, was smart enough to get on the horn and stop this from happening, because if it had, the entire world may have followed suit and the dollar would have traded about 1-to-1 with the yuan. That's 1-to-1 yuan. You don't even know what that is. In short, the reserve currency reality is what keeps the U.S. dollar afloat via economic blackmail. Should the U.S. dollar fail, then everyone will be stuck holding monopoly money in their central banks. And the IMF has the Bank Corps. I hope that's right. Doesn't matter. They do have a currency called the Bank Corps, waiting in just such a circumstance should occur. This is not a fake currency. It's already made. Indeed, the Bank Corps is not fictional. It was made up by economist John Maynard Keynes. It is already in place should the dollar fail. It will be traded by central banks only, 1-for-1 with the failing dollar, but at considerably fluctuating rates for any other investors who want to trade in dollars after that initial deal. This means if your banker or broker is not prepared to get you Bank Corps within minutes of their being available, you'll have to give up more than $1 to get one Bank Corps. In 2009, all right, now foreclosures. Can we get to foreclosures? Click. Oh, there's the Bank Corps. Go to the next Bank Corps, because it doesn't matter. Go. Beautiful. Beautiful. And the IMF has, in 2009, the U.S. averaged 6,600 foreclosures per day. Per day. In 2010, it jumped to over 10,000 foreclosures per day. In 2011, it's down to 9,000 per day, and this is considered good news. Go to the next one. No, go back to one. They can try to read that as I blab. Libbity blab, libbity blab. The worst year for home foreclosure since the 1930s was 1933, which saw 1,000 home foreclosures per day. Sure, there were less Americans then, but does that mitigate the fact that hundreds of thousands of Americans are losing their main investments with the money they put in to back their loans and the equity in their homes? No.
How dare Clinton write a book called Back to Work, Why We Need Smart Government for a Strong Economy, that was just this year, when his own idiotic government passed the two main laws that put us in this mess. Then cut off funding for the gigantic rise in poverty. Now he wants Americans to get back to work, and get back to work we have. In France, South Korea, China, anywhere that has work. But nah, haha, good luck finding a job in the USA. I wonder how much his advance was for that book, and what his total take will be on that book, and I wonder how much of that he will give to charity. I really, really want to know. Okay, now we can click through some of these. Well, in the US, I filmed a documentary with filmmaker Christian Alba. We took in quite a charade by Senator Simpson of Wyoming and Bowles of North Carolina, who run the bipartisan National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility Reform. They suggested higher taxes and cuts to entitlements. Oh, more cuts to entitlements? Is it possible? And defense spending are the only way to avoid the moment of truth that is seen in the United States. But Washington is not about to implement their plan, as Republicans refuse to even consider a dime in tax increases, and may well control the whole town again soon. Worse yet, even if taken at its word, this plan would wipe out entitlements in such draconian ways as to render the already impoverished desperate, perhaps starving. Aha! Just like Argentina, if enough Americans are so desperate, perhaps Republicans can lower the minimum wage, thus giving small and large business owners incentives to hire more people. Oops, bye-bye middle class. Already minimum wage earners are nowhere near the middle class in the United States, and that's at $7 an hour. Grim realities are hitting the U.S. as fuel and food prices are skyrocketing, while wages are going down, and so many are unemployed. But oil companies will be okay. Oil spills or no oil spills? Already the U.S. pays a number of countries for GATT infractions, rather than exposing the well-subsidized farmers of the U.S. to free trade. European and U.S. subsidies to farmers have made it impossible for Africa to strengthen their economies. Corrupt governments in Africa have exacerbated this. But for those who refuse to play ball, the consequences of remaining outside globalization can be huge. Cuba, Iraq, North Korea are all one need to know about how bad things can get when economic sanctions are applied. Economic sanctions are often the precursors to war. Thus, let's see what happens in Iran. We've got the sanctions in place already. Should Israel attack Iran, China will see this as an extension of the U.S. attacking Iran. Israel, the U.S. last ally, and well paid for at that, would be foolish to drop bombs in Iran without the backup of the U.S. China, however, gets about 30% of its imported oil from Iran. 50% of the U.S. Navy is floating between Taiwan and China. Why? I don't know. Worse yet, under Bush II, the U.S. stopped sending its annual letter to India reminding them they were breaking the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act they signed. Instead, we sent over 300 scientists to India to teach them how to build MX missile-sized nuclear bombs. Which they never had the capability of doing in the past. Why would the U.S. do this for one of the least stable democracies in the world? Well, India sits just to the west of China, for one, and our navies to the east. For those keeping score at home, the U.S. Navy can pinpoint a bomb and hit a single building from 400 miles of sea. William Blum accurately points out that the U.S. has attacked 31 countries, a total of over 70 times since the end of World War II. Beautiful. Go one back. Even more beautiful. The engine of American foreign policy, this is quote William Blum, he's a very good journalist, has been fueled not by a devotion of any kind of morality, or democracy for that matter, but rather by the necessity to serve other imperatives, which can be summarized as follows: making the world safe for American corporations, enhancing the financial statements of defense contractors at home who contributed generously to the members of Congress, preventing the rise of any society that might serve as a successful example as an alternative to the capitalist model, extending political and economic hegemony over the wide and areas possible as befits a great power. This, in the name of fighting a supposed moral crusade against the Cold Warriors, convinced the American Cold Warriors and the American people was the existence of an evil international communist conspiracy which in fact never existed, evil or not. The United States carried out extremely serious interventions into more than 70 nations in this period. For the record, I'm an American patriot who still believes the U.S. has a chance to make amends for its egregious attacks on human liberty since 1492, when Columbus started murdering and enslaving Native Americans. It will not happen if we keep electing people like Barack Obama or Mitt Romney. That is for sure. Obama campaigned on change, but has not even fought to change the unconstitutional or unwise laws Bush 2 cooked up or repealed. Not once has he mentioned repealing Patriot Act 1 or 2. Not once has he asked Congress to reinstate any of the 186 environmental laws Bush trashed. His only change in the Middle East was to move troops from Iraq to Pakistan, where he caused 2 million refugees to flee their homes. Don't forget, the last 200 miles of the oil pipeline from the Caspian Sea to the Indian Ocean must flow through Pakistan. U.S. citizens now live in a country where they can be arrested without habeas corpus. Now, I could talk about this for a week. This one sucks. Without being told why they're being arrested. At an Occupy movement in Chapel Hill, North Carolina in January, a journalist was smashed to the ground and was told not to take any more pictures of the machine gun-toting police that were arresting 20 peaceful hippie protesters. I mean, cops in Chapel Hill. No, with machine guns, and they broke her nose, actually, as it turns out. Caitlin F. will never be the same, but the U.S. may never be the same either. Let's go to YouTube. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is setting up camps in case of social disorder that will be able to house over 2 million visitors, and the U.S. jail population is over 2 million already. So they're ready to double the jails, and they've done it. They've built 112 concentration camps in the United States. We have film proof. We have film proof. I swear to God we have film proof.
American citizens have generated a lot of interest around the country in locating the potential prison camps throughout the country. These may be facilities currently being used as prisons, such as those you saw earlier, or prisons that are being built supposedly in the name of the war on drugs, or facilities that have other uses but which could be quickly used to detain large numbers of people, such as this Amtrak facility in Beech Grove, Indiana.
There's 112 like this already.
We're standing now in the main parking lot, which doesn't look too sinister. At this level, it is a very large parking lot, fenced on all sides by fence topped by barbed wire. It also has these electronically operated turnstiles. There is also a surveillance camera, just like we saw at the FEMA facility, pointing out to the parking lot, and a helicopter windsock. All of these apparent security measures are particularly unusual here, because this is a very low crime area, and this facility is nothing but an old train repair station with nothing in it worth stealing. In this portion of the parking lot is a brick building, suitable for processing, next to a gate that leads right out to the railroad tracks, and all of this is contained inside a fully fenced area, now 3 layers deep in fencing at this point. This U.S. Air Force train indicates federal and military involvement. Facing the opposite direction, you can see that this area too is a very large fenced area with railroad track running the length of the fence and plenty of warehouses. This facility was supposed to have closed in June of 1993, yet instead several $million in federal funds have been spent on supposed renovations over the past 2 years.
Oh yeah, it's not
Helicopter windsocks and markers are evident throughout the property. This small building is the only way into a particular fenced area. Inside this building, we see more of the motion-activated detectors, electronic turnstiles, and prison bars. All of the renovations to this property have involved putting in new fencing, electronic turnstiles, concrete flooring in unused warehouse buildings,
And the worst part.
and putting in large gas furnaces on buildings that were never heated any time in the past 20 years.
Large gas furnaces? On the ground floor?
Outside this building is fencing and a cattle run section of fence, all topped by barbed wire. pointing inward, not to keep people out, but to keep people in. This was common throughout the facility, particularly the new fencing that had been erected. Inside the fenced area on the other side of the building, you'll see signs that say Red Zone, right up next to the railroad tracks that run the length of the fenced area. Next to the Red Zone sign, you can see closely numbered markers on the fences that are too closely spaced to be parking markers, just as if they plan to have people line up to board the trains.
Ooh, not a pleasant thought.
Here's a helicopter marker on the power lines outside the facility, indicating expected helicopter traffic, and again, another tall radio antenna. Looking around, you can get an idea of how huge this place is and how many people it could contain in its fenced-in area. In yet another fenced area, we see a large warehouse building at the end, with the electronic turnstiles in front of it. The building is one that has a new concrete floor, and its doors and windows have all been blocked. Outside, there are new gas pipes. Even as we were filming, a black helicopter flew over us, observing what we were doing, which has happened many times when we have been at the facility. The gas lines and gas pipes at the facility run the length of the buildings. And come out at some very, very large, brand new furnaces that have been installed at the buildings throughout the facility. We found this crane, which has seen better days, but is plainly marked U.S. Army in the middle of the stockyard. We found other fully working military trucks and equipment here at other times. Inside the facility, we found large fenced-in areas next to the railroad tracks marked Green Zone and Blue Zone, suitable for holding a lot of people. Many of the old warehouse buildings have had new concrete floors put into them. Unused sections of railroad track have been dug up and replaced, and from the supplies in the stockyards, it is obvious they will be doing even more construction and fencing.
Okay, that's cool. So here's one of the 112 FEMA spots. If you have a copy of this, you can find out some interesting websites. FEMA's latest efforts, and this is a quote, to satisfy the demand for emergency cabs represents a continuation of preparations on behalf of the federal government to prepare for civil emergencies and potential social disorder. In order for the Occupy movement or any other, like the protests that toppled dictators in Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, to be successful, the replacements of the dictators will have to make life better for their people without the help, nay, under potential sanctions from world powers. Thus, growing self-sustaining economies will be the key to battle this fascism. A country like South Korea that is 70% dependent on exports for its GDP and 67% dependent on imports for its food are extremely vulnerable in these circumstances. Furthermore, although Korea has a wonderful track record of growing a middle class, a family in the 1960s might well get by on $100 US a year. Korea is up to 30,000 if you count both earners, 22 to 30,000 depending on who you listen to. That's a world-class job. But there's a couple of sneaky things about this. The Chaebol companies, which of course were the same families that helped the Japanese when they were here. The Chaebol companies, just the top 8 of them, make 60% of the gross domestic product. But they only hire 5% of the workers in Korea. Could have a bigger middle class according to this, if my math is correct. 1. And 2, the famous monthly wage. In the US, still some people pay overtime for over 40 hours. That would be 1.5 or even 2 times the pay of the first 40 hours. Thus, if you stay on the job more than 40 hours, it costs the employer more money. But in South Korea, with the monthly wage, it would be the supervisors' and managers' duty to get as many hours as they can from their workers for that same steady monthly wage. That's just a little bit sneaky. But in Gwangju, where the opening pay for a graduated student at a bank can be 1.3 million a month, and where you could work a little more than 60 hours a week, go ask your fellow junior banker, this is tough. Very tough. Everybody has their own little ways. The US way, ship the jobs overseas. That's really pernicious. No doubt about it. South Korea has its ways. I already said this one. I gave a couple of those instances. Perhaps none of the 175 demands the Occupy movement has penned so far will be met with laws that meet those demands. Thus, they will have to come up with an electable candidate, which, you know, the Occupy movement did not run a candidate for any office, as low as dog catcher up to president. I was so mad at them for that. I guess they expect the Democrats to change. Wow. Really? I mean, wow. It has to be to the left of Barack Obama, and who will bring home 100% of the American troops, reduce military spending by 3 times the rate the entitlements are reduced, and get the U.S. to stop being a fascist bully in order to concentrate on national health care. Oh, God, don't get me started about the mess that is Obamacare. It's a mess. You can be right or left and still hate that law or set of laws. We could have national health care like so many non-combative countries already. If such a candidate were elected, she would have to also have her party in control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. And here's where it gets extremely unlikely. The U.S. Electoral College and embedded yet illegal 2-party system. By the way, all political parties are against the law in the United States according to our own Constitution, because the founders of our country wanted people to vote for the man, note man, they wanted them to vote for the man, not some ridiculous ideas or philosophy that was set by a party. Look at the Constitution. Political parties are against the law. Oops, we're not enforcing that law very well. I'd love to see it, but it ain't gonna happen. It's just one of those things, we'll brush it aside. The U.S. Electoral College embedded the illegal 2-party system will surely see this never happens. Fascists don't give up, they just die. Steve Jobs and his mega profitable Apple computer refused to shut down its repressive factory in China due to profit demands from its shareholders. Oh, I see. A company as flush in cash as Apple won't even hire Americans. Who's gonna then? Now Obama says he's going to bring jobs back to the U.S. The other day he made a speech, American prosperity is built from the ground up. But where are the laws, you dummy? Now Obama, Since 1917, history shows that revolutions often make things worse than they were before. I'm talking Russia again. How can globalization be worse than it is now? World War III, that's how. It's been centuries since China was an imperialist country. Not true for the United States. One suspects that China would be a tough country to conquer. Thus, like me, I'm sure you're against World War III, right? Against World War III, I think so. Since it could start in Iran or right here, who knows? The question is, how do we as citizens prevent World War III before it occurs? And the answer is peace. What do we want? Peace. When do we want it? Now. I have a whole lot of websites that you can attest to. Click to the next one. You can look at the countries. There are rundowns of exactly what we did in all these countries on the printed page, where the U.S. has intervened. China, Italy, Greece, Philippines, South Korea, Albania, South Korea. Of course, George Katsifikas would say, don't forget 1948 in Chechen. If you don't remember, I'll tell you about it after the show. Let's see, okay, we invented the Korean War, but I'll go into that with whoever wants to. Albania, Germany, Iran, Guatemala, Middle East, Indonesia, British Guiana, Vietnam, oh God, so sad. Cambodia, even more sad. You know, Pol Pot was on our payroll. Really? Congo, Zaire, Brazil, there must be more. Oh, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Indonesia, Chile, Greece, East Timor, Nicaragua, Grenada, Libya, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, El Salvador, Haiti, Yugoslavia, and this is the other Afghanistan, where we gave the shoulder-launched missiles to Osama bin Laden to knock out the Russian planes. Kind of sad, very sad. Yugoslavia, how many Americans in the room know that in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, 60,000 people died during the bombings of 1998 and 1999. I was shown all the blown up buildings. And those bombs were coated with irradiated paint, and Serbia will not be able to grow a safe crop for another 100,000 years. Serbia, the breadbasket of Yugoslavia, and no one will buy their crops. You want to see poverty? Go to Serbia. It is so sad. It's just sick. And why? Because we dropped irradiated bombs under who? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton never stopped anything to do with the sanctions in Iraq. He bombed more people in Iraq than both Bushes combined. Look it up, it's a fact. Bill Clinton was no angel, and now he's telling us to get back to work? Oh, it's just sick. Next, go to the next one. Oh, these aren't in there because that list was nice. Of course, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan. 5 million refugees, give or take, 1 million dead, give or take. It's not kind of funny, you shouldn't say give or take about 1 million people being dead. How long will it be before Iraq forgets what the U.S. did? How long will we have a permanent enemy in the Middle East? Oh, I don't know how long, but it's kind of sad. And all this to the absolute wonderful help of globalization. You see, globalization means that you can get the cheapest possible labor and hire William Bush, that would be George Bush Sr.'s brother, to float that stuff out of China. The Bush family got 70-75% of everything that leaves China. They get their percentage because they've got the shipping companies. And they had them in place before Tiananmen Square. Did anyone figure out how China got most favored nation trading status 2 weeks after the democracy movement was put down in Tiananmen Square? Anyone got the math on that? This bully human rights mess of China gets trumped by the human rights mess of the U.S. Is war a human rights violation? Is war terrorism? If it is, we're in trouble. But they go rat-tat-tat-tat, they kill all these people, democracy's dead in China. And 2 weeks later, George Bush the Sr., here's most favored nation trading status that Canada doesn't even have. Are you serious? I'm serious. So these type of things bother me, and I try to keep them under my, hat. And I'm sorry if I got loud, but we can do the questions now.